Everyone, welcome to Arena Decklists. We are recording this live on Twitch. For those of you who missed it, feel free to follow our channels at twitch.tv/Arena Decklists and twitch.tv/
Bryan G MTG. But
there we go.
I think we're gonna do more on the Arena Decklist channel. We're trying to just get both of us on there and doing our stuff.
Ooh, yeah, comeback 323 call says Weeb and Boomer rare combo. You are correct. I was having a little bit of technical difficulty setting up the stream. Bryan coached me through it, and we're here now. It's all great, and we have some huge Pioneer announcements. Bryan, what do you think?
I'm pleased.
Okay.
I'm very pleased. If you listened, I guess we should start with the announcements. Ban list updates. The ban cards for this announcement. Smuggler's Copter.
Boo.
Once Upon a Time.
Yay.
Are you booing the Smuggler's Copter announcement?
Just keep going.
Okay. Smuggler's Copter. Once Upon a Time. And now you've distracted me and I forget what the third ban is. What's the third ban?
Field of the Dead. Field of the Dead.
You.
Yay.
I haven't slept in so long. Thank you, Jerry. You're going to have to do that a bunch as we do this stream. Yeah, those are the three exact bans I proposed on our podcast this week. I said that's exactly what had to go, and it looks like Wizards felt similarly. And the one that's iffy to me is Smuggler's Copter. I second your boos to some extent. The rest of the stuff, though, I think it is a big step in getting Pioneer to the format it is meant to be.
People in the chat saying that Copter was framed. I believe it.
It kind of was, yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, it was always going to be omnipresent in any aggressive deck. It ate up a lot of space in any aggressive deck. You were certainly going to be relying upon Copter. I liked it as a card. I thought it brought up interesting decisions. I thought it brought up interesting gameplay. But you can understand why, if the format is just congealing around it, might be better to trim that part of the power level a little bit.
Look, let's just ban everything until Elder Deep Fiend is good. How about that?
Well, we're on the path, and I mean, the general thing, the way we have been approaching this, is to ban the best stuff. But now there's going to be new best stuff. So do we just do this in perpetuity? Like, do you think we are moving towards a cogent endgame with these bans at this point?
I don't know. So I will say that I like Smuggler's Copter as a card. I like the fact that aggressive decks had things like Mutavault, Copter, vehicles, planeswalkers, whatever, things that were not necessarily just KO'd by Supreme Verdict and gave them a way to fight against these bigger control decks and, gave them a little bit of velocity and card filtering and stuff like that. I think aggressive decks really need that to actually be successful. But then again, Copter being omnipresent is certainly a net negative for the format, and it is just a little too strong on rate, I think. So, I mean, the fact that the card was everywhere makes a lot of sense. I think anyone could have predicted that, and I'm not surprised to see it go. I'm not even necessarily unhappy that it's gone. I just don't like the idea of aggro kind of getting the shaft, but maybe we are moving into a world where aggro is going to be very good and in a lot of different forms, kind of like Ian Duke mentioned in the announcement.
Yeah, so I want to unpack the impact of the other two bans on aggro, because I think that's just as important as the ban of Smuggler's Copter. One of the reasons you were so incentivized to play Smuggler's Copter, and I'm not going to pretend like this was the reason. I mean, it's just a very, very good card on rate, and you don't really need metagame reasons to be pushed towards Smuggler's Copter. But the existence of Field of the Dead means you were never, ever getting away from that card in any aggressive strategy, because you were so incentivized to get your last few points of damage in the air. And now I think the ground is opened up a little bit by the absence of Field of the Dead. Now, the question you have to ask is well, does that mean there's more space for Oko in the metagame? And I think where a metagame remains mostly fair, that's a card we should remain concerned about basically at all times. There is potential for that to just take over at any given point. And, the main reason I think it will stay safe in Legacy and Vintage is the existence of Pyroblast, but anywhere else it is a scary, scary card, as we've already seen in Modern. So I am curious to see what that card does presently. But you also have to acknowledge the banning of Field of the Dead, a huge boon for two strategies really in particular. that I want to highlight. It's ground-based aggressive decks where you just are trying to force through damage through combat, and you don't have evasiveness like Trample, like Embercleave, like Smuggler's Copter. So there is a lot of space opened up for that style of decks, and also any type of control deck. I mean, we saw this in Standard. You cannot go long against Field of the Dead. It will absolutely bury you. And, I felt so smart after Field of the Dead was banned. The day it was banned, I went online and I bought a bunch of foil copies of Field of the Dead at its absolute lowest point. And I am just getting slaughtered left and right on these foils. Although, even though I say that, everything I buy still seems to go up. Like Oko has rebounded from its standard ban, and Once Upon a Time now down in 2 formats. I don't know if my full art foil Once Upon a Times can hold through 2 bans at this point, and who knows if there's another one coming as we go to Modern. But it's crazy just what Magic cards printed in 2019 have done. They have wrought havoc across every conceivable format, and man, did the power level breaks get way out of whack at some point.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, I think, though.
Sure.
Yeah, there are still 8 elves, right? So certainly looking at good 3-drops, Oko is the first thing that comes to mind, and there are a lot of different builds of Simic that have been doing very well in the last week of PTQs, and it even looked like that sort of deck was poised to maybe be able to actually beat Field of the Dead and Smuggler's Copter, and obviously losing Once Upon a Time is a big hit for them. They're much less consistent, but I mean, you can also play Gilded Goose alongside Oko and just have as many like turn 1 mana dorks as you could possibly want, basically.
Yeah, I do want to point to the fact, and we were both against this tactic, but some of these green-red aggressive decks were not maxing on Once Upon a Time. So at least there's somebody out there who thinks you can get by without the card, and it makes sense. You do have a lot of 1 mana accelerants, like you mentioned. 1 drop into 3 drop, I expect to remain very good in the format. Probably, if you were asking me to set up my tier 1 on day 0 of these bans, I'm still there. I'm still looking for the best 1 drop into 3 drop setup, and I still think there's a possibility like 12 1 mana accelerants will ultimately be proved to be too much for this format and the health of this format. We'll let that play out over time, though, and we'll see how that evolves.
Yeah, Sam Black points out that problem with replacing Once Upon a Time with mana creatures is that you're way more likely to flood and not find high impact
Absolutely.
card. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Like I said, it makes the decks way less consistent, but you are still capable of moving in a direction where you can try and maximize like 1 into 3, and I think the Gruul decks do a very good job of that as far as just trying to get a Rabble Master or Legion War Boss on turn 2, and then the green stompy decks like Steel Leaf Champion, Oko, Ronus, Lovestruck Beast too, I guess. Like, those decks are maybe going to have to play just more mana creatures and live with the inherent variance of doing that, but I think that they're going to be fine with it because they're ultimately doing one of the most powerful things in the format.
Right. One thing I will point to address that problem is I want to see more decks that are leveraging Gilded Goose more effectively. So like getting value from that food is a really good way to mitigate the fact that you've jammed your deck full of these 1-drops. And we all know the best way to get value from your food is oftentimes Oko. So we'll see if that gets pushed even harder in as far as next steps for the format go.
Yeah, I mean, Cat Oven is close to playable in Pioneer.
It is. It's
anyway.
real close.
There are a bunch of different versions that have 5-0'd. I've messed around with it a bunch too, and one of the problems was certainly just like the speed at which people were attacking you, and then the super powerful end games that came online very quickly. And I think both of those things are mitigated to some degree, so you can go a little bit harder on food if you want to. But even the Simic decks have started playing Wicked Wolf and stuff like that, so they are becoming more and more just normal food decks.
Yeah, and makes sense to me. That is another powerful combo. Thanks again, 2019, setting us up with some bangers in the Pioneer format for sure.
Yeah, so without Copter, I guess let's start there. Like, is Mono Black still a thing? What other aggro decks are popping up? What's going to happen?
I really have to think very carefully about whether Mono Black can continue to exist in the absence of Copter. Like, it is fundamentally integral to exactly what that deck is trying to set up, and very much points to the reason why the deck can go long so effectively. Now, there's other ways to set up that deck, and the core of Thoughtseize Fatal Push, and like I said, Black Castle is a really, really powerful setup. And I thought there was a possibility Black Castle might be the card eating the ban in this scenario.
Me too.
Went with Smuggler's Copter, so I get that. I think that's fine. I'm not putting up the deck on the shelf without testing it. I think there's a very good chance it still holds pace. I see someone in the chat pointing out like vampires and going to Sorin. Maybe. I mean, maybe that's another point of interaction you can press on, and you still get those same powerful cores we're talking about, as opposed to doing Blood-Soaked Champion type stuff. You're just doing, oh, here's my vampire, here's my Sorin, try and beat that. And as we saw in Standard, that is a very, very effective strategy.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the format presumably slowing down a little bit, or at least, the aggro decks that are trying to go 1 into 3 are going to be more inconsistent, and then what are the control decks going to be doing? Like, we're probably going to see a return to something like Azorius Control. The ramp decks will probably have to be focused on Eldrazi type of stuff, which is much more easy to deal with from like a mono black point of view than Field of the Dead. So I think things line up for like a slower mid-rangey aggressive deck to actually succeed, but again, like, we'll see. We don't have all the answers or anything, and this is like a very layered set of bans where it's just like cutting the top tier just off of the knees, I guess.
Yeah, it's crazy. The whole format has changed, and you have to wonder about the space for combo decks as well to be able to more effectively do their thing. When you're not always going 1-drop into 3-drop from the aggressive decks, there probably is a little bit more space for combo to find holes to poke through. So we'll have to see if that avenue gets explored as well.
Yeah, Cardboard Nomad points out Glint Sleeve Siphoner plus Aethersphere Harvester. I was already a big fan of Harvester, but it's also one of those things where like flyers mattered against the Horde of Zombies and against the green creature decks and against the opposing Smugglers Copters. Yeah. So that was one of the things that made that card very strong. But also, if there are more aggressive decks and there are things like Supreme Verdict in these fair decks, like Aethersphere Harvester, just vehicles in general are quite good.
And I see Sam Black talking about Black Devotion. There's so many powerful things you can still do with this core of black cards. Zombies is another thing I've seen mentioned. So there's all these tribal strategies. There's slightly bigger approaches to the mono black setup. The 12 card core to me is almost certainly Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Black Castle. And as long as you have access to that, there's a lot of space to explore. So I think something black is going to remain in the format. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but don't give up on those castles quite yet.
One thing I will say that it's probably time to cut the Night Market Lookouts from your deck.
Yeah, as the biggest supporter of Night Market Lookout, I feel bad. I have to finally put it on the bench, but I do agree with you. It's not going to hold up without Smuggler's Copter.
It had its time, and it was glorious. Even I came around.
Yeah, a beautiful thing to see happen in a powered up format. All of a sudden, Night Market Lookout, one of the best beaters.
I mean, it really needed additional help from just Copter, and now that you don't have Copter, it's just not doing enough. So I don't know. Maybe the black decks will end up moving into a second color. There's things like Bomat Courier that have not seen a ton of play and are still like quite good in the format, I think. Yo Man's talking about Fourth Bridge Prowler. Like, sure. Torch Devil.
The options are there. It's on us to do the work and figure out exactly the new face of these mono black decks.
Yeah, for sure. So, once upon a time, mostly just added a lot of consistency to the green decks and the Field of the Dead decks. I would imagine that decks that played once upon a time are still just going to exist and, add a couple lands, add another 1-mana creature, add another threat or something.
Yeah, it depends exactly what we're trying to accomplish. The thing about Once Upon a Time is it just became good in every single green deck. So right. Every single deck is going to have to rethink its strategy to some extent. Prior to Field of the Dead, Eldrazi was one of the most powerful setups Green Ramp had ever found. So it's weird to be like, oh no, now we have to default to Eldrazi. I think like Shrine of the Forgotten Gods, Hour of Promise stuff still works to some extent. And early on in the format, people were taking that route more than they were taking the Field of the Dead route. There's no question that Field of the Dead ultimately proved to be the better option. I don't think anyone's going to debate that. But there are other powerful green ramp options, just like there are powerful black options. And that feels like a lot of what we're doing is just managing power levels and bringing things back to pace with the rest of the field. I mean, it's certainly how Mono Green Devotion was dealt with, right? It was about maintaining it as a deck and just bringing it down a peg or two. And I think that's mostly what has happened here, even if some of it feels a little fundamental, because I talked about once upon a time into Accelerant being a core of the format, but Accelerant into 3-drop still going to be there as a very important focal point. So I don't think it actually changes as much as you would expect at first blush. It's just depowering everything a little bit, so there's more space for other decks to step up.
Right, and I mean, I think that is the goal of a lot of these bans. Some of the things like Field of the Dead, it's like, yeah, we could, just ban every single enabler or whatever, but it is better to actually just remove the problem card. And again, it's kind of weird to see like Field get axed and then like, Leyline gets banned instead of Nykthos or whatever, but it doesn't seem super consistent.
I'm willing to write that off as a Theros thing at this point.
Yeah,
and
of
just
course.
like be done with it. It's fine. There are interesting devotion decks. I think. I think the black and like blue shells that play one of Nykthos are pretty neat. Whatever. It's spilled milk at this point. We lost Leyline, and it's time to accept Nykthos into our hearts.
Yeah. So Field is mostly just killing those decks, like as far as banned Field or Golgari or whatever, but it is important to note still that ramp exists, and to that end, you can play like even Sam and Autumn's green black ramp with like an Eldrazi endgame, and a lot of people were already kind of doing that. And Once Upon a Time also just makes those creature decks a little bit weaker. So that is basically all of these bans are trying to do, is just pull everything in line with each other, and we are getting closer and closer to actually having a good format, which I like. But like, what is the next thing? I mean, people are talking about Nexus or maybe Hour of Promise, Emrakul, something like that could end up potentially being a problem. So, what are you excited to try in the Sam Black school of thought? Like, what is the next thing that you're going to put in your deck, hoping that it gets banned, or assuming it's going to get banned?
I mean, look, there was a set of cards that when we started this format, everyone was horrified of. It was almost incomprehensible that the delve spells could remain legal in this format. And as I see more and more combo shells look to take advantage of them, I get excited. And one of the ones I would certainly mention is Nexus. I thought there was actually a very good argument for just removing from Nexus from the format right now, because it's going to inhibit a very specific play style. It's going to be hard to just be like a middle of the road aggro deck without disruption. Those will almost always get shut out by any type of Wilderness Reclamation, Fog, Nexus of Fate setup. But on top of that, the Wilderness Reclamation decks also comprise the best Dig Through Time decks right now, which I think is a really, really powerful place to be, as everything else gets pulled back a peg and Dig Through Time is just sitting out there. So that's the really powerful thing. But we're starting to see these Lotus Field combo decks pop off. There's Possibility Storm that was floating around, and these decks certainly felt a step behind everything else. But as everyone else comes back to the field, we have to pay very, very close attention to these powerful, powerful delve spells. It would not surprise me if this is the next boogeyman that ultimately proves its worth. I do think there is a good case, and I think this is something we predicted to some extent. Without fetch lands, these cards are much worse. Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, they are not what they were previously. But I still think Dig Through Time crosses that messed up threshold at some point if you build properly around it. So that, I think, is the next one up, the next broken card to really get pushed as hard as you can.
Yeah, I mean, especially with aggro decks losing a lot of consistency, both from Once Upon a Time and just like the filtering ability from Smuggler's Copter, it seems like those decks are going to be weaker on average and aren't as reliably going to find their most important cards and curve out as efficiently and everything. And yeah, that makes me a little scared for something like Nexus or Lotus Field, if that deck is better than Nexus. I'm not sure. But yeah, something along those lines seems like it could be very good. And then you still have like the weird like sort of mid-range stuff, like people are talking about Teamer Emerge in chat, and I talked about Elder Deep Fiend and stuff. Like, I want Kozilek Return setups to be viable, but if there are like Dig Through Time combo decks, those decks just can't exist.
Yeah, they have to be more disruptive than they are presently built to be, and maybe they'll find a way to do so. Although a lot of your deck space is eaten up by that core package, right? Like setting up the Emerge decks just eats so many slots. It's really hard to find meaningful interaction at that point.
Yeah. So, dig through time. Are you just gonna try Nexus or Lotus Field, some combination?
Folks in the chat pointing out that Lotus Field did take a bit of a hit with Once Upon a
It
Time
did.
going.
Yeah,
Like
of course.
that was a meaningful card. I think the easiest starting point is Nexus. You know me, I'll always take
Yeah.
the easy way out if you give it to me. So if I had a PTQ to play on zero testing, I had to sign up right now. Sure, fire up the Nexus deck that has been completely fine in this format, and make people account for you. Because again, this is like a blind format. So figure out what things people will not be accounting for. And if you think people will go, oh, there's no field of it anymore, so I don't need to answer big threats, well, maybe you can do Ulamog stuff and do Shrine of the Forsaken Gods and still get really effective ramp setups. So it's all about anticipating how people will react to this. In that scenario, I mean, I'm a little afraid of doing that into a very clearly powerful Nexus deck. So like these are two very opposed paths. I think only
Right.
one of them is really viable because the other one closes it out. So we'll have to see which way people fall. I don't know. I mean, this has been a really interesting experiment to see these formats evolve, and they do reach a static point really quickly, which is interesting. I don't know if that's just the excitement for the format and so many people iterating on it, but I mean, these metagames have gotten to solved is generous. Like, I don't think they're solved, but at least a static and like accessible point very early on.
Yeah. I've had a ton of fun with this format. And it's like obviously kind of weird to like put in a bunch of work and then just have it all go to hell a couple weeks later, but I don't know. It's just we're in a unique time, and I kind of just want to play around with this while it's here, I guess, because if this were like the norm, I would probably hate it. But
Yeah, there's folks in the chat saying that it seems like we are embracing this setup a little bit more, and it's just like, well, what choice do you have? Like this is the reality of the Pioneer format, and have fun with it, enjoy it. You are coming off a PTQ finals appearance with mono black aggro, so you've lost your deck. Your beloved has gone. I don't know. Did you fall in love with the deck? Did it go that far as to call it your beloved?
no, I mean I like a lot of the cards in the deck, but it just like it was a tool to me. It was like, okay, this is obviously the best deck. I have some ideas for how to make some matchups a little bit better, and I got to make kind of like a hard read on the format that like sort of panned out, didn't really pan out, where I got to cut some of the thought seizes from the main deck, and I felt like that was a thing that people should have probably been doing at that point, and it's cool to be able to take that shot myself because like no one else is gonna do it. And yeah, I mean, the first few rounds were a little rocky because I kept playing against Nexus and Control decks and stuff like that. But then I got the later rounds and it was just like all Simic aggro and mono black, and not having Thoughtseize in the mirrors especially was great. So I enjoyed myself. I think it was like the perfect PTQ for me to play that deck in, and kind of got rewarded. But I don't know. I love Copter. I don't necessarily love the rest of the deck.
Okay. No, that's fair. Have you seen anything out there? It's funny. I actually ended up not writing an article this week just because of my travel schedule, and it was really hard to find time to sit down and do it. But one of the ideas I wanted to explore was just mining the weeks and weeks of PTQs for what I thought would be safe decks. And basically, I saw these three cards at the target, so it would have
Mm-hmm.
worked out as a pretty effective article. But ultimately, I didn't write it because it was a bit of a gamble. If there were way different bands, it's just kind of worthless, and my time was really tight. But I started doing some preliminary research and just looking for things I would write about. There wasn't anything. Like among the PTQ decks, these three cards were basically in virtually every single deck. Now, if you go to league
Yeah.
results, things go much deeper and you can find some outliers. Have you seen anything that is just like ready made to go with these cards absent? Obviously, we talked about Nexus, um, but something a little bit more off the radar that you think has potential to be a primetime player. I want to mention an aggro deck that I liked early on in the format was Spirits. I thought it did a good job being more disruptive and still having a good clock. I think it was circumvented in a lot of ways by the blue-green Stompy decks, because if you can just play bigger creatures and not have to worry about combining them together and still have access to counter magic in the form of Stubborn Denial, that's a really nice place to be. With them losing Once Upon a Time, I might take a look at Spirits again. But do you have anything on your radar that you want to return to with these metagame evolutions?
Well, if we're talking about aggro potentially needing to be like a little bit slower, a little bit more robust, something with Collected Company seems very good. Like that is one of the cards that was a nightmare for control for sweepers and was mostly invalidated by Copter and to a lesser extent Oko, where it's like, oh, the aggro decks just have better tools. They don't need to play this card. But now it's like, okay, like maybe that is the type of thing that you turn to. Like you just play Oko and Collected Company, and maybe that's a Spirit Shell. I don't know. I've gotten beat up by Spirits several times in the queues at least, and I thought that was like a fine deck against the ramp decks and everything. Just ends up being pretty bad against the hyper efficient aggro decks, especially with Smuggler's Copter in the mix. But now there's probably going to be a lot less flying. Flying might just end up being unblockable for the most part. So yeah, I could see Spirits being a thing.
Rhino Coins in the chat saying Collected Company could be explored now that you're not forced into playing Once Upon a Time in green. And that does make some sense to me. Like that eats up some of the deck building space. You need to keep your hit count really high. And in a lot of ways, building around Once Upon a Time was just better than building around Collected Company. So that'll be a nice card to have unlocked. Although we all know about my complicated relationship with Collected Company. I probably won't be casting that card. I hope you all have fun doing it.
Yeah, I do know. I would not push that on you. I don't wish that sort of suffering on anyone, let alone, I
appreciate that.
One of my best friends. So I will take the hit. I'll do that. And you can work on Nexus and Ramp, I guess. I'll try Collected Company, maybe some mono red.
Okay. So you were high on Smuggler's Copter in mono red. I talked to some folks who were not. In that scenario, if you don't think Smuggler's Copter was important for mono red, this has to look really nice for you, right?
So I liked Copter in mono red with the bigger setups. Like if you're going up to Rabble Master and stuff like that, but that ultimately ended up not being the best version of the deck. So when you're like all 1-drops and a lot of them have haste and stuff, like Copter is not very good. So yeah, like the most recent versions of red are just like all 1-mana cards and no Copters, and I definitely like that approach. But this is one of the times I think where you can certainly try like the all 1-drop approach, and I will give that a try, but I'm more interested in building like a mid-rangey-ish red deck.
That sounds promising. Another archetype I want to put you on the spot about, and I realize this is early. It's okay if you don't have an answer right now. The thing about field leaving is you assume it opens up some space for control. And I really want control to be part of this format. I know a lot of people really want control to be part of this format. I have concerns about white's removal and just playing traditional blue-white control. It makes me pause a little bit. I'm not saying it's impossible. I will look into it. I will explore it. But there are some issues with the card pool. Do you see a path forward for control that you're excited about right now?
Yeah, I think that sort of deck will get a lot better, certainly as like these oppressive things get banned, and maybe there will be more prints in the future that are aimed at standard, but also like, get printed knowing that they have Pioneer applications, where if blue-white had a reasonable 2-mana counterspell, I'm not talking Censor, I'm not talking Quench or whatever, like something that was actively good, then I would be more about it. And the 2-mana removal, I think, is actually fine. You get to play a decent mix, like Seal Away or Blessed Alliance or whatever, Azorius Charm. I think the problem is like that you can't just automatically jam 4 and it's super good. But if you play like 2-1-1 or whatever, 2-2-1, then I think that covers a lot of your bases.
I think the bigger issue is just the absolute absence of 1-mana removal, which is very, very important in a bunch of scenarios. So I agree you can find good answers in the 2-mana slot. It's just no 1-mana removal whatsoever.
Right. You are relying on Supreme Verdict to catch you up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. If there was like another good cantrip or whatever, but like obviously that leads us down a kind of dangerous path with Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time already, but like, yeah, something that would allow you to find Supreme Verdict a little bit more consistently. I don't know.
A very big bear mentioning Oust for white. That would be a card I would like to see. You think about how powerful the cards are in standard. Like, if we could bear Oust and Mana Leak so easily, it wouldn't even be a problem.
Yep.
But I don't know if things are going to go in that direction. I agree. Better answers seems to be a net positive for present standard, present Pioneer. We would all benefit from that a little bit.
1 second.
I don't know what's happening. I'm assuming Gerry left. I can't see him. I'm just talking at a blank screen.
No, I turned my light on, man. I'm back.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Uh, yeah, also would be great. I think that would be a card that could also just help mid-rangey decks, which would be cool. Condemn is something that would probably just be more geared towards actual control, but I'd also be fine with. And I do want to see the removal suites kind of like pulled in line with each other. Like right now, red has the only shock, and then people start playing things that like shock is not good against. And then Fatal Push is like the great catch-all, and it's good against so many things. And then white just has nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So
a lot of nothing. Although white did just win the PTQ, Jerry. Give white its due. Big victory.
No.
For no, you're not going to talk about white knights.
I mean, deck's fine, obviously, but hard pass.
Yeah, I thought it was a really sweet metagame call. We'll see if it continues to be part of the format going forward. People certainly were not prepared for it.
Yeah. Oh man, Nick Prince feeling personally
He's always
attacked.
there. He's always
every
there
time I make some comment about white, I have to like look over my shoulder and see if Nick's there. And in this case, it wouldn't have even done anything. You know, I guess I could have checked who was in the chat or whatever. But oh well. No, I mean
like Santa Claus. He knows when you're talking crap about white creatures.
Yeah. The white decks have things like Sheffet Dunes and a lot of different pump 'em ups and Brave the Elements and yes, even History of Benalia. So like they have a decent amount of staying power. They need a little something. And I'm looking forward to the next set of previews that comes out for standard sets. Maybe not this set, but like, 6 months from now or whatever. And like taking a good hard look at how those cards impact Pioneer, because I think that is going to be a thing that happens. Like they're going to start actually building with Pioneer in mind, and the format's just going to get better as a result.
Yeah, even before that point, I still think the next set will be really exciting. We'll have two formats where you expect a lot of the cards to hit, especially if the power level even approaches Throne of Eldraine. I mean, obviously, if it approaches Throne of Eldraine, we're talking about every single format. But I do think it changes the content creation game a little bit. There should be meaningful space open in Pioneer with most sets. And for a long time, that wasn't the case with Modern. You generally did a really brief show on the few cards that might hit. Recently, that has certainly changed, and everything hits in Modern. But I assume things will settle down again as we move into Theros, and it'll provide some cool opportunities to talk about new archetypes for sure.
Well, Cave Dan wrote an article for the Arena Decklist website where he analyzed every single card that could potentially have modern applications, and he came up with 64 cards or something, 68 cards. And it's like, think about that in terms of Pioneer, right? Like more things are actually going to get added to the format, and it's like, that's cool, but I just want things that are specifically tailored with Pioneer in mind.
Sure. I'm sure we're going to get those as time goes on as well.
Yeah, now what? I think first order of business is for me to try Elder Deep Fiend again and see where people are and try and...
It's always your first order of business. That's been your first order of business since we got into this format.
Yeah, well, I got those foils that are just, chilling, not really doing a lot. I just goldfish that deck every couple days. It's great. But I think now if you want to get in with your weirdo Pioneer crap, it is the time, right? A week from now, people are going to be testing for PTQs. They're going to be honing in on what is actually good and busted and well positioned in the format. But right now, it's going to be the Wild West again, and that's where I want to be.
Agreed. It's the best time in Magic. I will spend this next week here in London, but I hope... Well, do I hope to have time to play Pioneer? I mean, I kind of hope I'm out doing cool things and being busy. I do think, though, I will make time for some leagues at night just to chill out a little bit and explore some new stuff.
Send me some screenshots.
Will do.
All right. Someone whose name I can't pronounce said, "Let's go Mantis Rider." That's kind of what I want. Let's get the format to a place where Mantis Rider's good.
Mana's tough, but as time goes on, obviously it gets better and better. And we'll see if we can figure out a way to get it into our decks.
You have 8 fast lands and 12 shock lands, man. What else do you want?
A mana base that doesn't look like 8 fast lands and 12 shock lands, basically, is what I'm looking for.
There's no Field of the Dead, man. We get to clean up our mana bases now.
Yeah, but I could also play Castle and Mutavault, and that sounds pretty appealing as well.
Mutavault in your Mantis Rider deck. That's ambitious, dude.
Let's do it. Why not? Anything's possible.
All right. Anything else on the agenda?
No, let's take some questions from chat, and then I'm going to collapse and be sleepy. So if chat would like to know anything about our opinions on present Pioneer, hit us with them.
Ooh, Chuck MTG asking about Kethis. Yeah, that's another one that's still just kind of like chilling in the background.
Right. So again, once upon a time, every green deck you can say that about, but it didn't feel like Kethis was super reliant on the card. It certainly benefited from the card, as all green decks ever obviously do. But yeah, I remain excited about Kethis. I see very promising deck lists come out of that archetype.
Matt Nelson asked if they should have hit field and then looked at Copter. I don't think so, because Copter was already just the biggest thing going on. And if you decide that you're gonna hit it, I mean, you might as well just hit it now. It's probably only gonna get better.
I think they could have tried that. I do think that's a reasonable approach, but it would have been slow and basically exactly the opposite of how they have approached this format thus far. And I mean, I think they're enjoying themselves building a format from the ground up like this. I think it's an interesting experiment. I am very curious where things settle. So I'm along for the ride at this point, and I think that's why we got the bands we did.
Nissa Cosplay asking about energy decks. Someone else asking about Marvel. The problem with energy I've found, and this is as I'm currently in a league with an energy deck and have realized this, is that the food shell is just so much better.
The better parasitic mechanic.
Yeah, well, and Simic, you just get all the stuff that you would want from Teamer anyway. Like, Wicked Wolf and Oko just solve your removal issues and are threats on their own. You don't need to play things like Harness Lightning and Whirler, and, you know, Rogue Refiner is mostly outmoded by, like, Tireless Tracker and stuff, so, yeah. As for Marvel specifically, I'm going to try and make that work, too. We'll see.
Well, I wish you the best of luck in that archetype. I see someone asking, it looks like Connor/Fizz, is Hardened Scales going to be running rampant? It's funny, we were both super high on that deck early on. It kind of did nothing for a very long time. Then at the Invitational, it showed up back on the radar hard. And the thing that brought it back on the radar was the addition of 4 Once Upon a Time and 8 Mana Dorks. I thought that was the way forward for the deck. And then it kind of disappeared again and didn't really do anything in the PTQs. And maybe it was just the worst archetype. I don't know. It looked very impressive on camera throughout the weekend at the Invitational, but it was also playing a lot of mirror matches. So there's this weird thing going on where if both Hardened Scales decks are doing their things, then I'm sure it looks very impressive. And it played against a lot of mono green Devotion, which has also trended down in the most recent PTQs. So I'm not sure where that leaves Hardened Scales. I continue to think that foundationally it is a fine way to approach the format. It just hasn't panned out thus far, though. Maybe this is what it needs, though. As we said, we have to keep track of all these archetypes. As things get powered down, look for the next comers to step up.
Vector MTG, I don't like how Madness decks are paying for mono black Sins. Me too. Delver Guy, is it a good idea to try working on decks that don't need Once Upon a Time, or Once Upon a Time decks with replacement first? Follow your heart. You
always the best advice.
You get to work on whatever you want.
That is the best thing about Magic the Gathering. And Soul List, does that live post-ban? Already it was on the way out. Smuggler's Copter, an incredibly important card for that deck. I think there's other stuff to be done in the artifact space. One of the things about artifacts is Spire of Industry gives you very good access to colored mana. And all that glitters approaches are interesting. So there's something there. I don't think typical like blue, red, and soul builds are going to continue to be the way forward, but I want to go back to that space a little bit and see what we can accomplish.
Crude MTG, what do you think would have to happen for a 3-color deck to be relevant in the format? I think that you would need to have to stretch into a 3rd color to solve some issue, and Sultai did that in the beginning by getting like some more versatile spells and some card advantage, whereas green black couldn't really do that on its own until Sam
found field.
Yeah, until Sam put Our Promise in the field deck and just maxed on Tireless Tracker, right? So like I think people are finding a lot of ways to solve the problems that a 3rd color would solve by staying in 2 colors, and then I'm not sure what it would take for the format to actually get to a point where it necessitates a third color.
It's interesting. I would like Sultai to be good. I obviously it won the first PTQ, but that was in the most unrefined format possible. I think your assessment is very good. There needs to be a reason to do so, and even in the absence of field, like you can still make an argument that green black can get the job done with a bunch of setups, and you can still make the argument that you can do something with Hour of Promise even. So it certainly won't have the same power level, but there's good setups in 2-color decks right now, and really need a reason before you stretch.
Right. Yusung7788. I really enjoyed your brewing videos. Do you mind going through the process of how you brew new decks, especially in a new format? I mean, it's mostly just picking a card or an interaction that I like or think I think has promise. There we go, words. And just go from there. Like, figure out all the different cards and interactions that live around that original thing, and just pick one or the other to build around. And at some point you will get good at eyeballing and just be like, this won't work, this will work. But yeah, it's just find a thing that you like, build decks around it, try them out, iterate on them, and you'll figure out your own process and what works for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna push you a little bit on this question, because we get this. I mean, this is probably the question we get more than any other on the planet, right? Some version of this question: how do I start building decks? And we've internalized it to such a huge degree at this point. I actually find it really challenging.
I was trying to keep the answer short, so
no, I'm stretching it out. I don't keep anything short. You know that.
Okay, I mean,
longer now.
This could be an entire podcast episode, and I'd be fine with doing that at some point. But yeah, hit me with your questions.
The thing I want you to say is, if you can, how do you figure out what has captured your attention, or the thing you think is a positive interaction to explore? Like, what clues you in on, okay, this is something that I need to look at. For me, I look for things that the entire format is incapable of interacting with or accounting for. That's a really, really big plus for me. Something that goes very far over the top of something, or a 2-card interaction that just there's no removal for, or just takes over games as they're commonly played. What are you looking for when you're looking for good combinations?
Yeah, a lot of it is proactiveness, right? Where you are looking for a thing that people cannot deal with, or they are not set up well to deal with. And the other way to go about it is looking for a thing that stops your opponents from doing their thing that nothing else in the format is doing. So off the top of my head, I guess I don't really have a good example for that, but like one of the videos I did recently was Gate to the Afterlife, where I felt like a lot of decks are attacking on the ground for the most part. There is like some air chip shots or whatever, but you have a bunch of creatures that you don't mind going to the graveyard, and then you have this artifact thing that you can just play and activate for 5 mana, or play it on turn 3, and most decks can't interact with it. And then you just set up a bunch of Agent of Treacheries and Champion of Wits and stuff like that. It just felt like it was not easy for decks in the format to currently interact with that. And the card that I used as the payoff, Agent of Treachery, was specifically aimed at Field of the Dead. And I like built my mana base in such a way where if I took a Field of the Dead, I could probably activate it, you know? So there are things like that where in a vacuum, if you're trying to build like the best or fastest Gate to the Afterlife deck, you would use something like Aurelia, or there's like the Metamai combo, Combat Celebrant, stuff like that. But I went a different angle based on what the format was weak to.
Uniqueness is something I think you should always be cognizant of. Like, unique angles of attack is the simplest way to phrase up exactly what I'm looking for too.
Yeah, so, don't brew a bad version of something else just for the sake of brewing it, because that's not particularly helpful. I mean, you can do it to have fun and everything, but figure out what your goals are. If your goal is actually to try and figure out a new archetype or tune a new archetype that would potentially break a format, then you need to be doing something unique. Absolutely.
Yep. All right, one final question, because I'm so sleepy. Adam Tanner, does Pioneer just now move to what 3-mana planeswalkers can we build around?
No.
It's funny because that's been the furthest thing from what Pioneer has been thus far, and I think it's what everyone expected it to be, right? At a time when Oko and the War of the Spark Planeswalkers had just come about, that seemed like the obvious starting point, and it just has not been the case. So that happening would be a fundamental shift in the way the format is set up, and I don't think the removal of these 3 cards pushes things hard enough in that direction that these planeswalkers are invalidating everything else that's going on. But I acknowledge they are among the most powerful cards ever printed. They dominate a lot of formats. At some point, they will have their day in Pioneer too, I'm sure.
Yeah. So that probably wraps it up, I guess. Brian, you good? You want to go to sleep?
I'm so tired. I love you all so much. I appreciate that you come and hear us talk about these changes, and I want to be there for you the second they happen. And we missed the last one, so I really felt like we owed this one. I'm glad we got together and did it through all the technical difficulties, and I appreciate everyone coming and listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I am going to raid someone for sure. Thank you everyone for showing up, and yeah, thank you for the subs and everything. Who should I raid? I was looking at Todd Anderson talking about the Pioneer bans, or Newmod is playing his MC deck on Arena.
Either one of those players, very worthy raid. I think we got Todd last time, so maybe it's time to hook Newmod up and get him some viewers and let folks hang out with him. Get him ready for this MC coming up.
All right, now let me just figure out how to raid people.
/raid.
Is that it?
Type the username. Oh, that's it. It's very easy.
So simple.
Very simple. You're learning so much. I'm so proud of you, Gerald.
Thanks, buddy. Is Todd worthy? Yeah, sometimes.
No, Todd's always worthy. Don't be mean to Todd. The best Pioneer player on the planet. I'm giving him that title. I'll say it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.